All right. So we'll go here. We'll kind of get going. Sorry for the delay. I've never had a building locked on me when I get there before to teach. So, I'm gonna turn this off. You don't want to see me in the background. We left off right here. So before we get going, once again, sorry the door is locked. We're a little bit slow getting in here. I just gave them a call. We might get interrupted here just for the people who are going to be in here after us, to make sure that doesn't happen to them. But we'll pick up kind of where we left off. We'll cover module 1 material basically today. So a couple things before we get started. Make sure that this, okay. We're also having, there we go, tech issue. So this is great. So, you'll see on Canvas, I mentioned I'd put up that module 2 reading. I had a couple emails. I'm pretty sure I said this. Is module 1 an assignment? No, right? That was just there so you had the first chapter of the book and you can kind of review it. So when it comes to answering the questions in module 1, you don't have to worry about that. It's not an assigned reading. The first assigned reading is module 2, which I put up after class on Tuesday, which is living right here on Canvas. That one is going to be due when? So Monday by, the module readings are a little bit weird, the end of the day, but not 11:59, 11:50, because we have to allow a little bit of buffer time for it to sync over to Canvas. Okay? So you've got that module 1 reading. After class today, you will see the quiz 1 pop up under here under module 1. It'll be half the questions roughly related to the syllabus, things that we talked about on Tuesday's class. The other half will be material that we cover today. Okay? So if you're preparing for that, we've got that set of practice problems, a little bit smaller than most modules because there's not as much material this week. So you can kind of review those practice problems. You've got the answer key along with it. I would kind of make sure I feel pretty good with those before I take the quiz. Once you start the quiz, you will have how long to take it? 1 hour, 60 minutes, right? So this first one shouldn't be too bad. Time really shouldn't be an issue. But we want to kind of get into the habit that every week we're going to have this module reading that's due on Monday at 11:50 and a quiz that's due at 11:59, with the exception of the week around an exam. Okay. I also just wanted to mention here. Oh, and I don't have it pulled up here because I was trying to use this computer, and of course it's not working. So we're hitting like the trifecta of everything today. So I just wanted to mention this because I didn't scroll through the whole syllabus on Tuesday's class. But if you're kind of thinking about the whole semester, I tried to put kind of a summary of like due dates and like what we're doing each week down here in the syllabus. So if you scroll down a little bit in the syllabus, we'll kind of have that. So I don't know. I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that. I think I've gotten a couple questions, people reaching out about what materials going to be covered on which exams. This would kind of answer that, but also kind of give you a roadmap for the whole semester about what we're doing each week. Okay. And I've got the dates kind of attached to it. All right. Other than that, I think that should be everything that I wanted to mention before we hop into material. Are there any other questions for me before we get going? I will also say you might see something get updated tomorrow. I'm waiting on like one more of my CL session leaders, these weekly collaborative learnings that start next week. So we won't have a module 1 collaborative learning. It'll start with module 2 next week. But I will probably post something that has kind of the who the UGI assigned to each time and location will be. I also updated the file on Canvas. So if you go to the files tab, I originally just had the days and times because I got those locations late. If you go to the files tab now, it says CL times and locations. It's got the locations attached. There will be 3 available at every single time slot. Okay. So kind of think about which ones work best for you. Maybe the location gives you a little bit of help there. Okay. And once again, I'm trying to make this clear. I'll say it just once again. I am going to post something probably next Monday. So that collaborative learning poll that's on Canvas that I said you should try to fill out, that gives me your preferences, that's due at the end of the day Sunday. It's not for any points, so I say it's due. That's when I will look at the data. right? Monday, I'll do some magic behind the scenes to put you all into a room, kind of time, day, location. So that like when you see your name and it's assigned to a specific date, time, location, that doesn't mean that's the only CL session you can ever attend. That's just the one I can guarantee you'll have a seat for. In practice, you can attend any CL session that you want, and there will likely be a seat available, right? These are like 30-person rooms. Generally, not all of you go. And so usually there's plenty of room in any daytime location. Me assigning you to one is just a way that I can guarantee, kind of cover my end, that there will be a seat available for you at that daytime location. It doesn't lock you in. That's the only one you can go to. It doesn't mean that there won't be available seats in other ones. It's just my way of guaranteeing kind of to like cover my end of things. Okay. Is that clear? Any questions on that? Okay. All right. So we're only getting going kind of 10 minutes late here on material, but most of the had to go through something. Here we go. All right. So if we're thinking about kind of what economics is as a whole, we're really trying to this semester figure out we've got a bunch of decisions to make and we have limited resources, right? So every day you have limited, you do this every single day. You have 24 hours in a day. You have to try to figure out how can I do as much as I possibly can, things that I want to do, things that I need to do for classes. I also need to sleep, right? So you've got a scarce resource of time and you're trying to figure out what's the optimal way I can allocate my time. Now, I also want to make sure I'm doing some things that are fun. So maybe I want to make sure I'm doing 2 hours of studying, but also 2 hours of hanging out with my friends, etc. Okay. So that's at its core what we're doing with economics, right? So we think about this in another context, like why don't you go out and purchase your ideal car, right? So I don't know what my ideal car is. I really just don't care about them. My wife's would be like a brand new, I don't know, changes every day. Right now, she's got a bright yellow, kind of neon yellow Jeep, right? Well, why doesn't she go out and get kind of the brand new kind of Jeep this year? What would that require? Us taking some of our scarce resources of money and going out and buying that brand new Jeep, right? So you're always kind of facing this decision of why can't I do everything I want to do? I have all these wants, but I have scarce resources. I have to figure out how I'm going to allocate my time, my money, right, to these different things, okay? So really at its core, what we're doing in economics, there's going to always be trade-offs to every decision I make. Every decision I make, if I go out and buy that car, I'm not going to have enough money to go out and maybe buy a house, right? I'm having to make a trade-off there, determining what I want to do with that scarce resource of money. Or if I choose to, say, go to the gym, right? Maybe I like working out. I'm giving up that time to where I could have been studying or hanging out with friends or whatever it is, okay? So that's at its core what we're doing, okay? Now, I think I introduced this on Tuesday. This class, the technical name is Introduction to Economics for Business, Part 1. It's really microeconomics. So we'll touch on in Module 2 will be like the most macroeconomics material we cover. But there is going to be this difference between micro and macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is like the study of the economy as a whole, right? So we're looking usually there at more like country level things. That would be B252, which you will take next. Excuse me, you'll talk about things like inflation, the money supply, et cetera. And then we have microeconomics, which is more of not how do countries, how do governments make decisions on a macro level, but how do firms, individuals, households make decisions at a micro level, right? So we're kind of thinking about going down to like looking at individuals as opposed to the economy as a whole, okay? We can get, within microeconomics, like I said, even module 2, we start to touch on macro level ideas. So, you could argue an individual's decision is much more micro than a firm's decision, right? But we might also analyze a specific market. Maybe I want to analyze, the accounting firm market, right? Well, that's a little bit more macro than an individual decision, but we would still kind of consider that micro because it's not the entire economy. We're looking at one specific industry or one specific sector. So we'll kind of touch on like some of those different sectors throughout the semester, okay? So when we think about individual decision-making, we said this class is primarily going to be micro. We're going to think about people make decisions out of both self and social interest. Individuals make decisions out of self-interest, but we might be interested in if people weren't selfish, what would be the kind of socially optimal decision? So if you think about things like, I probably got an example here. Yeah, there we go. Littering, right? If you're walking around, I see people all the time like throwing trash out of their window as they're driving, or people just kind of drop things as they're walking around campus. That is in their self-interest because they don't want to take the time. It's costly to go find a trash can, right, to go throw it away. So for them, the individual decision is, well, I don't want to incur this cost of like having to walk way over there to throw it away, so I'm just going to drop it, right? Well, if everybody acts out of self-interest, what happens socially? If everybody's just dropping their trash on the ground, campus looks like a mess, right? There's trash everywhere. That's not in the best social interest. So part of this class, what we'll do is we'll understand how individuals will make decisions out of self-interest, but then we'll also analyze those same types of decisions and say, what would be in the best social interest? What will be best for society, right? You can even argue things like legalizing drugs, right? Well, maybe that allows their people to make self-interested choices of using these drugs. But if it's easier to use these drugs, what maybe happens socially? We have a lot more people, if you're in Bloomington long enough, you will see plenty of people who are on drugs roaming around the town, right? Just go down to Seminary Park, and it's evident, it's a very clear problem, right? So we'll talk about self-interest and social interest, okay? And I kind of already mentioned some of these things, but it doesn't have to be, it could be how you're spending your money. Maybe, most people, they spend way too much money on Starbucks. Well, all of that money could be going towards things that would probably better society if they would take that and maybe, I don't know, put it towards education, put it towards, I don't know, cleaning up their house so that socially there's, cleaner neighborhoods. It doesn't just have to be money. It doesn't just have to be dropping litter on the ground. It could be also how you're using your money, your time, okay? So the main thing that we're going to talk about with making optimal decisions. So we'll first start thinking about how do we make an optimal decision as an individual, okay? When I think about I'm choosing to do something, I'm really going to outweigh the benefits and the costs, right? So let's say I'm working at a job and they ask me, hey, can you work an extra hour today? Well, what's the benefit of that? I'm getting paid whatever my hourly wage rate is, right? Why would I maybe decline to work an extra hour? Spend time with my kid, do something else. Essentially, by choosing to work, I'm giving up not doing something else. What am I giving up? That's what we would call our opportunity cost. Whenever I make a decision, I'm really weighing out the benefits and the costs. We'll end up talking about not just benefits, but we actually weigh out the marginal benefit or the additional benefit and the additional cost of working that extra hour. But these additional costs, if we're acting out of self-interest and we're choosing optimally, we should factor in these opportunity costs or these things that we're giving up, right? That's part of the cost to doing something. So you might think about if I, choose to go to I think I've got here like a concert or something. That might say, oh, here I've got. If I choose to go to Chipotle, right? I'm not just weighing out, well, what's the benefit that I would if I had to put a dollar amount to it of going to eat at Chipotle, and how much is that meal going to cost me? If I'm giving up a meal that I prefer much more, so maybe I don't really like Mexican food and I really like Chick-fil-A, well, I shouldn't just be weighing out the costs and the benefits of eating at Chipotle in terms of how much that meal is going to cost me. I should also be factoring in, well, what am I giving up? I'm giving up the fact that I'm not eating a meal that I value way more. So we want to be factoring in these opportunity costs to our decision making. We don't think about it this way, but even something like how much time you're spending on TikTok, it might seem like that's free, right? It might seem like I'm getting a marginal benefit of scrolling on my phone, and the marginal cost, how much is it costing me? Nothing. It's a free app, right? But all that time that I'm wasting on TikTok, what could I be doing? I don't know, cleaning my room, doing my homework, right? So there's all these things that I'm giving up. That's the actual cost. So why don't you just sit 24 hours a day and scroll on TikTok? Because at a certain point, the cost, the things you're not doing, becomes way too high. You find it more valuable to, I don't know, sleep as opposed to just stay on TikTok for 24 hours, okay? So we're still trying to figure out how do we allocate this scarce resource of time or money, but we all want to factor in when we're making a decision, what are we giving up, okay? So I've kind of already mentioned this, but you can also think about if I want to go, let's say I got a friend and like, hey, we're going to go up to, oh, what is it called now? It's not Deer Creek. It's Ruoff, right? So they changed them all the time. So Ruoff, it's a concert center up near Indianapolis. Let's say you have a friend, they're like, hey, I've got a free concert and it's some band that you want to go see. Completely free. The cost is zero, right? I'm going to get a huge marginal benefit. I love this band. I'm going to go up there and watch them, but I have to call off work. Well, it's not really a free concert, right? What is it going to cost you to go to that concert? However much money you could have made working at your job during that time, right? Or that shift or whatever it is, okay? So we want to factor in, there's no such thing, even when we think about things like using TikTok, going to a free concert, there's always going to be a cost of what am I not doing? Or in economics, you'll kind of see if you even Google it or something like the age-old saying is there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? Every choice you make has an opportunity cost, okay? So, I don't know, I've got my little mouse here, right? Looks like it's a free lunch. Well, not really, right? If I go for that cheese, bad things are going to happen, okay? So I'll paint this maybe in something that seems a little bit less trivial, but also, a lot of you are living in the dorms right now. I don't remember, I don't know how it works in Bloomington. I'm not as in touch with the rental market. When I was in college, you had to start making housing decisions for the next year, like right now, right? So if you're not aware of that, I'm sure Bloomington is very similar, right? If you're thinking about your housing decisions for next year, you got to start making them now. So if you're thinking about making a decision, you look at 3 different possible apartments, and let's say, these numbers probably don't make any sense in terms of Bloomington, but just kind of nice, easy numbers that we can compare. Let's say you have 3 kind of rental options, right? So apartment A, B, and C, right? They all, let's just for a second say they have all the exact same kind of amenities, right? They look exactly the same. Right? They have this, same square footage, were built the same year, same number of bathrooms, etc. Okay. Well, if that's the case, which apartment should I choose? C, right? I mean, it's the cheapest option, right? It has the lowest cost. If they're all the exact same, I'm going to get the same additional benefit no matter which apartment I choose. So what am I really trying to maximize? The difference between that additional benefit and the cost, the additional cost. Well, if the additional benefit is the same for every apartment, I want to find the one that has that lowest cost, okay? Now, what if instead it's the exact same apartment, but I throw in one key characteristic? They're different distances from campus, right? That matters a lot if you're deciding where you want to live, okay? So let's say I've got these 3 apartments, and I think I did what? The most expensive apartment is closest to campus. The next most expensive is a little bit further, etc. So I said, I don't know, this is like the number of minutes you'd have to walk to and from campus. I don't know, multiplied it by how many trips you'd be making and kind of got some monthly number of minutes you're going to have to spend walking to and from your apartment to campus, right? Or if you don't want to think about it as walking, taking the bus, whatever it is, right? So the commute times, right? This scarce resource that you have, if you live in apartment C, you're going to have to use more of it. Right? You're going to have to give up 36 hours as opposed to just 12 hours if you live in apartment A. Okay? So with this in mind, what is true about your time? You value it, right? So if I live in apartment C, what am I giving up a lot of? My time. So even though it's the cheapest, why might I not want to live in apartment C? Because over the month, if I live there, if instead I lived in apartment A, I'm losing 24 hours in that month. So because we value our time, we want to be factoring that into our decision-making process. What is the cost of this time? So this is an easy way to think about cost. It's probably in practice a little bit more difficult to really value exactly. Every single person have a slightly different valuation, right? Depending on what you're doing with your time. But let's just think about, I could work some hourly, job, and in those hours I can make $10. And somehow we've figured out every hour of my day I value at $10, okay? Well, then if I think about these different apartments and I have the number of hours I'm going to lose every month kind of commuting to and from this apartment, what's the cost going to be from living at each one of these apartments in terms of how much time I'm giving up? So we're not looking at the rent right now. We're just looking at what's the cost of the time I have to give up. Well, apartment A, because it's closer, if I multiply the number of hours by how much I valued each hour, I'm going to figure out what the total opportunity cost is of living there, right? So it's not just the rental price of $1,000. It's also the loss of my time, how much I value that, which would be what, 120? Okay. So if I'm thinking about the total cost of each of these apartments, what I'd really want to do is add up the rental price each month to whatever that opportunity cost, whatever that value of time that I'm losing is. Now, if I do that, what apartment looks like it's the most attractive to live in? B, right? So if I don't factor in opportunity costs, I would have chose apartment C, which would not have been an optimal decision because I wasn't factoring in that if I live in apartment C, I'm going to lose more time, and I value time. If I don't value time, if the value of time up there instead of 10 is 0, which is not practical, everybody values their time at something, right? Then yes, apartment A would be, or apartment C would be the best. But here, once we factor in that I value my time, I factor in this opportunity cost that by choosing to live in this apartment, I'm giving up all of this time. The optimal decision is actually to live in apartment B. So this is kind of an easy little example to kind of show when we're making decisions, factoring in the opportunity cost can lead us to a different decision. In fact, it leads us to the optimal decision. Okay. In fact, if I would have chose apartment C, right, I would have had, slightly higher costs here. Okay. Any questions on this idea? Okay. So just to kind of think about this, what if I valued my time more? So let's say it's not just an hourly wage job. I don't know. Let's say I'm doing like work for a professor or something, and like I'm getting paid an hourly wage, but I'm also getting like work experience. It's going to be valuable and kind of lead to me being able to maybe get a better position kind of out of college. So maybe I value my time more at like $20 an hour. Well, what apartment's going to start to be a lot less attractive? The one that's further from campus, right? Because now I have that same loss of time, but if I value time more, the opportunity cost is going to be larger. So if you're thinking about this in terms of like a firm decision, right? When we see firms like they're giving up time to do things, if they can make more money than another firm could in that same time, they're really going to try to make decisions that minimize the amount of time that it takes them to do things. Okay. So if I have it at 20, I could just do the math here. But what's my opportunity cost of each one of these apartments? It's now twice as large, right? Instead of $10, it's now 20. So when I factor that in and look at my total cost, which apartment should I now choose? Well, now that most expensive apartment actually is the one that has the lowest total cost, right? Because I was saving the most time by choosing that apartment. So I was avoiding those really large opportunity costs. Okay. Any questions on this idea? Is this at least vibing with you guys, making sense a little bit? Okay. I feel like I'm trying to be hip and young by using the word vibe. That was terrible. I apologize. Okay. So, I don't know why my animation's turned off here on PowerPoint, but we'll ignore this for a second. So let's think now, instead of just these opportunity costs, let's think about marginal costs, right? So when we make decisions, we always make decisions, what we say in economics, on the margin, right? And all the word margin means, or marginal, is the additional. So those two terms are really interchangeable. I will always likely say marginal because that's my default. I'm in the world of economics, and that's how the terminology we use. But all marginal means is the additional cost or the additional benefit. So we're thinking about marginal costs here. And I think about, let's say I was in this apartment, right? So I go back to, I think I went back to when I valued my time at $10 an hour. I'm living in apartment A. If I choose to then move to apartment B, what is my marginal cost of moving apartments? How much are my costs going to change if I go from apartment A, or sorry, my current apartment to apartment 2? Yeah, I'm going from a 1,120 to 1,240. My additional cost would be $120. Now, what if I instead choose to go from my current apartment to apartment 3? What would my marginal cost there be? Yeah, I'm going from 1,120 to 1,360. My change, or the additional cost that I'm going to incur, is going to be $240 there. Right? So we can calculate these marginal costs, or what's the additional cost or the change in the cost of making this different decision. So when I choose to do something, right, or when I'm making a different apartment choice, what's the change or the additional or the marginal cost associated with that? Okay. Excuse me. So we can put this in different contexts. So think about, like, what's the additional cost of studying for another hour, right? What's the marginal cost? Well, it's however much I value that 1 hour, right? I'm giving up that hour. My opportunity cost there ends up being the same as my marginal cost, right? It's what I'm giving up. So the change in my cost from studying 1 more hour, it's how much I value that hour. Okay. You can think about, what about, I don't know, I'm thinking about the marginal cost of like driving, right? Well, the marginal cost is, if I'm thinking about driving instead of kind of walking, what am I giving up? Well, I'm having to pay for the car, for the gas, right? The marginal cost of driving an additional mile is going to be however much the gas costs me, right? But I can also think about part of the cost might be I'm factoring in like, there the cost we won't really think about is I'm saving time. There, saving time would actually be like the additional benefit. Okay? So it kind of changes depending on the example or the context we're looking at, but we'll start thinking about things on the margin. So we have this idea of thinking about cost changing. We also going to think about marginal benefits, or when I make a decision, what's the change in the benefit that I'm going to receive? So if I'm a company and I'm selling something, what's the additional benefit to me of selling that good? So if I'm a gas station and I sell a gallon of gas, what's the additional benefit to me? Whatever the price of a gallon of gas currently is. All right. Do you have a question? So, yep. So think about if you were to change, technically, yes, we could think about in most examples though. That example, it could be because I was like choosing the current apartment that was the most expensive. When we're talking about making the optimal decision, I would have never been in that current apartment because it was the most expensive, right? So in practice, marginal cost, I should be choosing to do the thing that has the lowest cost. So the choice of changing would always be a positive value, right? There I had a suboptimal decision just because to kind of show you the numbers, but right, yes, technically, if you were making a suboptimal decision and you changed, you could have a negative marginal cost. But everything that we're going to look at, marginal cost, we're assuming that people are making the optimal decision. And so marginal cost will always be positive. Does that make, so when I showed you there, we were choosing the optimal apartment currently. So that's why moving, the marginal cost was positive. If we instead had chosen to be in a suboptimal apartment there, my marginal cost could have been negative. But in practice, we're always thinking about people should be making decisions where they're maximizing essentially the difference between the marginal benefit and the marginal cost. So we'll get there eventually, and I'll kind of probably revisit your question. So, what about, so I think about, selling a product, it's however much I can sell it for. What's the marginal benefit of accepting a job offer? Whatever my salary is going to be, right? What about working my hourly wage rate? What about selling? I anticipated my own example, right? Whatever the price of a gallon of gas is. What is my marginal benefit of being instructor of economics or teacher here of economics? Well, I do get paid, right? But it might not just be my salary. If I accept a job, part of my marginal benefit might be my salary, but why do people, volunteer their time to do things without getting paid? So there's plenty of people who volunteer at clinics who, go on these like mission trips to other countries. Why do they do that?
Marginal benefit of doing it.
Yeah, when I do something that I enjoy, even if someone's not paying me to do it, I might still choose to do that because I get some intrinsic benefit, right? I love, I really do love teaching economics. And so would I potentially take a lower salary to do that instead of teaching, I don't know, statistics? Yes. I teach some stats courses and I like it, but not as much as I like teaching economics, right? And so anytime we're talking about marginal benefits, it gets a little bit trickier to really value it because we try to, especially in like the business, like in Kelly, they'll like really ingrain into you, I think. Someone asked me, I don't know if they're in this section, about what's like the value of like double majoring in finance, econ, accounting, econ. And I was like, at the core, a lot of the majors in Kelly and the way that Kelly will kind of get you guys to think is like dollars and cents, this business mindset. And like, yes, that is part of the benefit. That is part of the marginal benefit. But economics, we really start to dive into. We also get benefits from what we'll end up talking about in a later module, utility. How much does something bring me happiness or joy? There's a value to that as well, right? People will do things for free because it brings them joy, right? The marginal benefit that intrinsically they get from it is very large, even if there's no dollar amount attached to it, okay? So, you can even think about what's the value of a better view. If you look at like real estate, right? What do you think is true about a home where your backyard, you're literally 10 feet from the house behind you, as opposed to, in fact, the house my wife and I bought, we have like probably about a half acre of land behind us, and then it just opens up into what now is a soybean field. Usually it's corn, but we're in Indiana. But why did we maybe pay a little bit more for that house than a house and we live out kind of towards Ellettsville, which is a little bit northwest of here? Why didn't we choose to live like right in Bloomington? Because we really value that view. We value having space from our neighbors, having every morning I get to walk out, look out the sliding doors. I'll sit there with my son a lot of the times and he'll like watch the trees if the wind's blowing, right? We valued that a lot. And so we paid a little bit more money for it, right? Because there was a much larger marginal benefit. So this is just kind of all the things we can start to think about. And this will lead me into my next example. What's the marginal benefit of consuming an additional beer? Okay. So let's start to think about marginal decision-making. And this is where we'll now start to get some practice. And I got sidetracked because our room was locked and everything. So I got a little bit out of sorts. So let me make sure I have my markers here. So let's think about marginal decision-making and how we make optimal decisions. Okay. So let's say, I don't know, I've got the number of beers I'm going to consume here, right? So I'm thinking about if I go out and I mow the lawn on a hot day. When I get done, I go to my garage, I open my garage fridge, and I grab an ice cold beer, right? That provides me, when I'm tired and sweating from being outside in the summer and mowing the lawn, that brings me a huge marginal benefit, right? Now, let's just for a second, we'll kind of make a simplifying assumption. Let's assume for a second that the marginal cost, right, or actually, here, we'll do, I'll make this simplifying assumption first, and then we'll do the other one. I think it might make a little more sense to start out here. So we've got the number of beers here. Let's just assume, simplifying assumption, the marginal benefit of each beer, right, is the same. We'll each one is kind of punching well, what's the additional cost, right? Well, we might start out thinking, well, what's the additional cost to consuming a beer? However much the beer costs me, or a can of beer, whatever it costs. So maybe like to consume that first one, I might think about, well, it was ever the price of a can of beer is, I don't know, we'll say it was like $2. If I kind of buy a large amount and I average it out. Well, if I then take the time to then consume a second beer, is the marginal cost, was it really $2 to begin with? Well, what am I doing? I'm giving up some of my time, right? So I don't want to just factor in the cost of that beer. I want to factor in, well, what was the cost of the time? What am I not doing by sitting and enjoying this beer after I get done mowing the lawn? Well, if I have a second beer, I'm now giving up more time. So what's going to happen to my marginal cost? I'm now not doing things that are even more important. At least initially, maybe I didn't have a whole lot going on that day. I wasn't really giving up something that was really important to me. But now if I give up even more time, well, maybe now I'm not, I don't know, cleaning the house. So the cost is going to be a little bit higher. And if I have a third one, well, now what am I not doing with that time? Well, now maybe I'm not, I don't know, preparing my materials for class. Marginal cost is a little bit higher. Well, if I start getting to like 4, 5, 6 beers, at the sixth beer, I am no use around the house, for the next X number of hours. So the cost is going to be really, really high. So in general, we think about, as I'm choosing to buy more of something or consume more of something, even if it's not just my time, I'm taking money that I could have bought something else with. And what am I think about if I had like $100 and I'm going to go out and choose to buy, I don't know, a gallon of gas. What's like the first thing I'm not going to buy? I don't know, maybe a pack of gum. But if I have to buy a second gallon of gas, instead of, I've already given up not buying gum, I now can't buy, lunch. And if I buy a third gallon, what can I not buy? I start to have to give up things that I value more and more. So what's happening to my opportunity cost as I use more time or I use more money? My marginal cost should be going up. I'm giving up things, I'm giving up things I value more and more. My opportunity costs or my marginal costs are going to be increasing. So good question. I will draw everything that we do in this class. Sometimes I will draw some curve to it. Everything we're going to do is going to be using just linear equations. So the math won't be hard. So I might not have drawn it perfectly straight. For the sake of everything that we're going to draw in this class, we can think of things as being straight, right? But in practice, and it doesn't really matter, right? If I have a straight line or a curved line, that would still represent my marginal costs are increasing. What does a curved line mean? We won't dive into this in this class, but just to kind of see.
It just means that the marginal cost is like marginal cost for each one.
So both of these mean that the marginal cost is increasing, but if I add some curve to it, it's increasing at an increasing rate. Right? We won't dive into the whole increasing rate kind of thing. All you have to worry about is that's this upward sloping upward sloping marginal cost curve. We'll eventually talk about upward sloping supply curves, but for now, we're just thinking about marginal costs. Okay. Any questions on that before we keep moving? So what would be the kind of the optimal number of beers to consume here? Well, the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost for that first one. So the additional benefit to me is greater than the additional cost. So if the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost, I should choose to buy that good. I should choose to put my hour towards that activity, whatever the decision I'm making is. As long as the additional benefit is greater than the additional cost, it makes sense to do that, to buy that good, to put my hour towards that activity. So I would consume the first beer. What about the second? Marginal benefit still greater than the marginal cost. So I'd consume that one. What about the third? Marginal benefit is great. Okay. What about the fourth? Well, if the marginal benefit falls below the marginal cost, we wouldn't buy that. We wouldn't consume that. We wouldn't put that hour towards that activity. Okay? So we only choose to do something, buy something, put an hour towards activity, if the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. Now, in some of these examples, you'll notice in this example, the point where they're equal isn't like a whole number. So in this example, like it doesn't make sense. I guess I could technically say like maybe what's the optimal number would be right where the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost. So here we would say that consumers or individuals are indifferent. I'm no better off or no worse off if I choose to do something when the marginal benefit is exactly equal to the marginal cost. So we usually say people will choose to do something up to the point where marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost. Now, if we have an example like this where we have integers, maybe we would only stop at 3, but if we were making this truly continuous, that optimal point would be 3.5. Okay. And I won't ever try to trick you like in a problem with that. Usually we'll kind of have these nice continuous graphs and you'll be able to kind of see, okay, that point where they're exactly equal, what would that value actually be? But we're starting out with some easier examples first. Okay. Any questions on this before we keep moving? Okay. Now, you could see this in graph form. You could also see this in table form, right? So you might have something like, let's see where we're at in times. We go to 50 hour. So you might see something like quantity, marginal benefit, marginal cost. So let's do 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, generally said, as we buy more of something, so let's now think about if I am buying a gallon of gas, right? That first gallon is really, really valuable to me, right? Because I can get, where I need to go. Well, now in the second gallon, I can now drive further. Maybe I can do a few more of the things that weren't as important to me that I had to go do with that first gallon of gas, but I still wanted to do them. Well, by the time I get to like the 50th gallon of gas in a day, what's the marginal benefit of having that 50th gallon of gas for that day? I mean, unless I'm literally driving all day, I'm probably not going to use it, right? So as we buy more of something, the very first unit will give us the highest marginal benefit. If I go back to my beer example, that first beer that I drink after mowing the lawn on a hot day brings me a huge marginal benefit. The second one, while I still like it, I've already kind of quenched my thirst. I'm starting to cool down. I still enjoy it, but not near as much as the first. By the time I get to the third, well, now the additional benefit cooled down. I'm now starting to worry about other things. The marginal benefit is not near as large. So generally, we think about our marginal costs are increasing, but as you buy more of something, if I have one car, that brings me a huge marginal benefit. What's the additional benefit of then owning a second car if I'm just one person? Can't drive them both at the same time. Maybe I like that car. It's nice to, I don't know, drive around. Maybe it's like an old vintage car, but it doesn't have near the value that the first one did. So our marginal benefits are going to be decreasing. Yeah.
Everybody said that scenarios, quantity goes up, that actually increases.
So in general, you wouldn't ever think about you would see that marginal benefit ever increase. I mean, ever, right? Because when I choose to buy something, the very first, we could complicate this to be if there's like synergies or something where like you know, having oh, what's a good example of this? Maybe if I have like in my gallon of gas example, maybe if I want to drive to Indianapolis, having 1 gallon of gas won't fit me there. So the marginal benefit would actually be like 0. So, but then the second would be now I'm never going to give you those are very like weird examples. Almost all the time you think about whenever I buy the first unit of something, it's always going to give me the highest marginal benefit. It's just that sometimes I'll have to buy it not just like 1, 2, or 3. I'd have to buy like blocks of units. But that first block of like the first 10 gallons of gas would give me the highest marginal benefit. The next 10 lower. The next 10 lower. So sometimes it won't be not as easy in the real world as like 1, 2, 3, and 4. But it still would be the blocks or the quantities that I can buy this good in. So maybe I have to buy a quantity of 10. That first 10 will always have a higher marginal benefit than the next 10 and the next 10. Does that what you're getting at? Yep. So we're thinking about, you know, I've got this marginal. If I don't buy anything, what's the marginal benefit? Well, 0, right? What's the marginal cost? We don't really have to worry about the 0 one, right? What if I buy the first one? So maybe the marginal benefit I get here is like 20, 15, 10, 5, right? My marginal benefit is decreasing. So if I'm thinking about what this would look like on a graph, whatever good I'm thinking about, the number of units I'm buying, what's happening if I look at these quantities to my marginal benefit? It was starting out at 20, and then it was decreasing, right? So we're going to have these decreasing or declining marginal benefits. What should be happening to my marginal costs, right? We said, as I choose to buy more of something, I'm giving up not buying something else. I have to start giving up things that are more and more valuable to me, or my opportunity costs are going up. So we had these increasing marginal costs. So maybe, let's just see, I'll do 6, 12, 18. Just kind of make it nice and easy. So if I'm thinking about my marginal costs, they're starting out down here at 6, and they're increasing, okay? Now, if I had a truly continuous example, the optimal point would be right where the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost. I think I drew this a little bit out of scale, but if I was using the table, would I choose to buy the first unit of this good? Yeah, the marginal benefit is greater than the marginal cost. So yes, I would buy that unit. Would I buy the second unit? Marginal benefit greater than the marginal cost. So yes. Would I buy the third? Well, there the marginal benefit is less than the marginal cost. So no, I won't buy the third. The optimal decision would be to stop at 2. Now, if I had a truly continuous graph where I could like 1.1, 1.2, then maybe I would want to go up to the point where they're exactly equal. But I'm just kind of wanted to show you an example where you had a table where you're going to make that decision to buy that good or consume that quantity as long as the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to the marginal cost. Okay? Excuse me. So if I was drawing this out, purely continuous, if I gave you like a graph and asked you to identify, first of all, let's say we'll just kind of call this Q. This is going to be quantity. So we'll start using this a lot throughout the semester. But it's really like, what's the number of units I'm buying of something? What's the number of hours I'm devoting to a certain activity? Whatever the quantity of my decision making is. In general, what's going to be on our y-axis? I'll put dollars, but it's not like the sticker price of a good. Really, what we're plotting on the y-axis is going to represent the valuation in terms of what's the additional benefit or the additional cost if we had to put it in dollar terms. Okay? So dollars doesn't mean the sticker price of something, or right? But it's how much we could put if we had to put a dollar valuation to the additional benefit, or we had to put a dollar valuation to the additional cost. What would that be? Okay. So we said marginal costs are doing what? As I consume more of something, I buy more of it, or I put more hours towards it, they're going to be increasing. Right? Our marginal benefit, the very first car I buy has a huge marginal benefit. The second one, it's less, right? Or I could even think about this as if I'm studying, what do you think is true? If you don't look at anything, you go from 0 hours of studying for this first quiz, and then you spend 1 hour studying, what do you think the marginal benefit of that hour studying in terms of your performance on that quiz is going to be? Pretty high. What if you go from 1 hour to 2 hours, especially for this first quiz? I mean, there's not as much material. Part of it's just the syllabus, right? Which you can have pulled open in front of you. So that second hour, the marginal benefit is probably still positive, but it's going to be a lot lower. By the time you get to the 10th hour studied, what's the marginal benefit? Yeah, in fact, I would argue, and we won't ever look at weird examples like this, but if you like continue into economics, you could think about what could happen to my marginal benefit. We said it's decreasing. If I think about this as the number of hours I'm studying, at some point, I start studying things that probably aren't even going to be on the exam, and I'm just loading my brain up with more information. What could happen if I study for 10 hours? The marginal benefit could be negative, right? Now, when it comes to like buying things, why do we never really concern ourselves with that? Because as long as we have positive marginal costs, where should we be stopping? Where the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost. So we're always going to be making an optimal decision, or we're always going to stop putting hours towards studying at some point where marginal benefit and marginal costs are positive. We would never actually get out to that point where like the marginal benefit becomes negative. It doesn't even make sense as long as we have some positive marginal cost. So in general, I always kind of draw like technically at 0, right? What was the marginal benefit? We're not doing anything at 0. So you can think about there technically should be like an infinitesimally small gap there, right? But if you have a line for an equation, it would still have an intercept, right? So we still draw it coming from that y-axis, even though we know in practice, like if I don't buy something, the marginal benefit is 0, right? But that line, anytime I have like any, like what's behind lines on a graph? Equations. If you have an equation, what's the typical like in math equation? Y equals mx plus b. What's b? Our intercept, right? So even if that doesn't exist, we still would draw it as though we have some intercept to whatever that marginal benefit equation is. Does that make sense? Any other questions on this idea? Okay, where are we at in time? 10:30, perfect. All right. So back to the slides. So we kind of went through these examples. So as we kind of continue to go through this course, we're going to kind of start to make, what we call positive and normative statements. So positive statement, this might be like an easy quiz question to understand this difference. Right? Positive statements are statements of fact, right? It's what we actually observe in the real world. It's what people are actually doing, right? So what I think my example here is, I say, look, I looked at the data and people on average are saving approximately 5% of their income every month. However, I know like, okay, if I'm going to quit working at 65, I need to have a retirement account, right? There's always ebbs and flows in the economy. I probably want to have some money set aside in case, inflation occurs and prices go up. So even though people are on average saving 5%, we can also make normative statements, which is that people really should be, if they're choosing optimally to consider all these other things, they should be saving more than 5%. So that normative statement is really an opinion, or it's saying, based off of what we've counted, people should be saving this much. It's not actually how much they are saving, right? So it's not a fact. We're kind of giving an opinion, or we're giving a suggestion over what the optimal decision should be. That's a normative statement. How much people are actually saving, that is a fact. That's something that has occurred. That's the decision that they have made. That's our positive statement. Okay. So, a lot of what we'll do this semester is, okay, here, usually we'll start out with the normative. Like, here's what the optimal decision or outcome should be. okay, but the government does something that screws up this market, or people aren't factoring in something. What are people actually doing? So we'll compare like the positive statement, what we see actually occurring, to what would be best for society, which is our suggestion from our normative statement. Yeah, so these positive, so I wouldn't even necessarily call it positive normative economics. It's really positive normative statements. So positive statements will be something that's true. It's something that, if you want to think about it this way, it's something you could observe in data. Like it's actually occurred. There's no question about it. We know that this has occurred. If somebody was keeping a record of it, we would see that this is the actual number. This is the actual decision that was made. Does that?
Yeah.
Any other questions on this idea? Yeah. Yeah, you could think about like, what are you going to test it with? You're going to test it with data. Comes back to that same thing. Like you could go out and you could actually observe whether or not this is occurring, right? So in that, the context of the book saying it, you would like change your positive statement. If you go out and test it and you find that, oh, this statement wasn't actually true, you would then update that positive statement so that the number was actually added. If it's easier, you can kind of think about positive or like facts. This is what is occurring. Normative is like an opinion. That's the easiest way to kind of think about that. So normative economics, that's just like your opinion, man. So if you guys haven't seen The Big Lebowski, this is like, I mean, it's kind of like one of those really bad but good movies. You should all go watch it. It's hilarious. Okay. There we go. So at its core, economics, we aren't considered like a physics, like a hard science physics. We're not biology, we're not chemistry, but it's still a science. We call it like a social science. And so we still are going to follow the scientific method. Now, it probably would play out a little bit more in upper level econ courses than it will here, like in an intro course. But really, economics is a science. So we're still going to start out developing a theory. So we're going to use a lot of graphs to say, okay, based off of what we know about marginal costs and marginal benefits, where should the optimal point be? That's what our theory predicts, right? However, we then say, okay, well, we want to go out and test and see, are people actually devoting that optimal number of hours to study? Or are people actually saving that optimal amount of money? Or are they consuming the optimal number of beers, right? We then want to go out and test that using some data, right? So we want to test that theory. We'll go out and collect some data in order to test it. Once we look at the data, we'll say, okay, maybe our model, maybe our marginal benefits, we weren't factoring something in, right? So if I think about, like I said, business mindset, a lot of times we're like, well, man, people aren't taking these higher paying jobs, right? What the marginal benefit is higher. We should see more people entering into these different types of higher paying jobs. Why aren't they doing that? Well, maybe these higher paying jobs, you have to stay after work a lot. You might end up working 60 to 80 hours a week. What do some people value? Work-life balance, having more time away from work, right? And so maybe our theory would predict, yeah, if we're paying them this much money, like they should be choosing to enter this career field, but we're not seeing as many people enter that. And so maybe we're not factoring something in. So what do we do after we look at the data? We go back, we either found data that supported the model. If we didn't, we then have to update that model or update our theory to better capture, okay, people don't just care about their salary, they also care about having this time, kind of this work-life balance, right? And they might value that more than, maybe we knew that ahead of time, but maybe they value it more than we thought, right? Like going back to my department decision, maybe I thought people value their time at $10 an hour, maybe they actually valued it at 20, right? Which would then kind of change our optimal decision. So, we're going to use the scientific method. It won't be like always like detailed. I'm outlining this in all the stuff that we do, but really this is what we're going to do throughout the semester. Okay. Another thing that we're going to try to do is a lot of the times, and I kind of already did it today, especially when we're starting out with topics, we'll sometimes make simplifying assumptions. So we really want to get at the causal relationship, like X is changing, what's its impact on Y? The government imposes tariffs, what is the impact on inflation, or something like that? Well, we have to hold everything out. Like there's a lot of other things changing at the same time. So when we want to analyze the relationship between two things, we have to say holding everything else constant, right? If everything else stayed the same, but the government imposed higher tariffs, then what would the impact be on inflation, right? Now it gets very difficult to do this when we draw our models. We're assuming everything else is staying the same. We know in practice, even though tariffs went up, what's also changing? I mean, day to day, firms, individuals, the government are making tons of other decisions as well that might influence inflation. So in practice, it's difficult to hold those other things constant. But in the models that we start out trying to figure out what is the optimal point to be at, we're going to assume everything else is held constant. Now, really outside of this class, I don't know how many. Did any of you have I asked this question. I don't not as familiar with like what high schools are doing, especially outside of Indiana. Have any of you taken like data courses or use like R or Python in high school? Nobody? Yeah, a couple people, right? So one way that we have at doing this in practice, and we won't do it in this class, right? We're going to use these models where we hold everything else constant. And it might seem impractical because things aren't always, everything else is always changing simultaneously in the real world. But what we can do with data, going back to that scientific method, we have ways of running regressions where we can control, we can add in variables in these regressions and hold constant all these other factors. So even though we won't be using that kind of approach, that data approach in this class, we're just kind of looking at the theories. Excuse me. The next level would be, how do I hold all these things constant? Because my models are holding them constant. When we're drawing these graphs, we're assuming everything else is staying the same. In practice, we use data and we have some statistical methods where we can hold those things constant. Okay. So it's not the most impractical kind of assumption because we do have a way of testing these theories with data. Okay. And I kind of already went through all of this. Let me see. There we go. So I want to use my link here. Oops. So I put up a little link here where kind of so this is what the Federal Reserve Banks, this is like an economic organization and kind of government, but they do a lot of econ research. And so like you're looking at like the increasing cost of tuition and whether or not college is actually worth it. So you could think about, you have this model where you want to know what's the impact, right, of a college degree. So obtaining that college degree, how much more money can I expect to make over a lifetime? So that's going to help me give a valuation or the marginal benefit of a college degree. Right? What am I going to do? Well, what did that article do? What does the Fed do? They then go out and look at, well, what is the actual difference in the starting salary of somebody with a degree versus college degree versus someone that doesn't have it, right? So they have this theory that getting a college degree will increase your wages. Not a wild theory, right? Makes you a more productive worker, makes you more attractive to companies, but how much more? Well, there we go out and test the theory, looking at some actual data to look at differences between starting salaries, or we could even look at like differences across the first 20 years of working or something like that. So we have these models. We can then go out and get data to kind of test them. I think here, just out of having some kind of interesting numbers to look at, and I put up a link that they had some additional work. So I think this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They did like a very similar thing. And what was it? They had this old theory that they were using that, factoring in a lot of other variables in the United States, the value of a college degree, they had a model that predicted over your lifetime, you're earning about 50% more, right? So, I mean, you can think about, I don't know what that ends up being, but like doubling your salary essentially over your lifetime. Okay. They looked at some data and they did this for like people over 25. So like kind of factoring in that buffer zone of like, well, you have to use time to get the college degree. So after the age of 25, what do they have? People with a college degree on average is 1,400. People with a high school diploma, 850, right? So a pretty stark difference. If you just kind of take that ratio, the actual data, it looks like, well, it's not just a 50% return to education. It's actually like a 68% return. So our model is wrong. So we need to go back, revisit our model and update it, because a positive statement we can make is the actual data says the returns to a college degree is 68%. Our model was predicting 50. We must not have factored something in, right? Maybe our model was, outdated. Maybe that was looking at data from like the 80s or 90s. Currently, the valuation of a college degree is much higher. Right? So this is good news for all of you, right? In fact, why might the returns, sometimes I ask questions just to kind of get your brain. Why might the returns be even higher for you if you get your college education here? If this is an average wage, I think this is like weekly wages, but this is an average weekly wage. why might yours be higher than 1,400? Even if you're looking at other people with a college degree, where do some people go to college? Ivy Tech, some lesser esteemed. What's probably going to be true about the skill sets they build there, or even the network they build there. The huge advantage of you being at IU is the network. So what might be true about your weightings? They're even higher. Also, this is an average. What types of majors, college degrees might be in that average? Art majors. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess art majors make a lot less than someone coming from Kelly School of Business, right? So even though we found 68% here, we could even break this down to like look at the returns to different types of college degrees. And I imagine like for a business degree, or being the Kelly School of Business at IU, you can probably expect a lot more than that 68%. Okay. So good for you guys, right? So this idea of kind of when we're making statements and we're looking at averages, we have to think about like, yes, on average, someone with a college degree makes more. But going in the reverse, even though you guys can maybe expect more than a 68% return, if I do major in my dad used to always say this, and it's probably I don't know, not the most PC. He's like, some people go to college and they major in basket weaving, right? Like they choose these majors that really, what's the difference in someone who has a major in basket weaving versus someone with a high school diploma? Probably the same, right? And so if I'm looking at kind of averages, I need to think about, well, the average is like, there's going to be people on the below and above it, right? The average return to a college degree, there's going to be some majors that have a lower return and some majors that have a higher return, okay? We're also going to then kind of start to think about the differences between correlation and causation. So a lot of times in this class, we'll make statements. We're going to try to make causal statements. So for example, if I looked at ice cream sales and children's drowning deaths, they are highly positively correlated. If I look at the actual data, a positive statement is that when ice cream sales are higher, child drowning deaths are also higher. Would anyone argue that ice cream, I don't know, is our kids filling up on it and becoming sedated while they go out and swim? And then, no, right? I don't think anyone's going to argue that ice cream sales are causing children to drown. What are we missing here? This outside factor. When is our ice cream sales higher? When it's hot in the summer. When are more children going to be in water that might be dangerous? Hot in the summer, right? So even when we look at data and we find correlations, that's not causation, right? Causation is what we're going to try to get at with all of our models and our theories, which is when ice cream sales are higher, what's the causation on children drowning deaths? Zero. Even though they're correlated, there's no causal relationship. Everything we're going to talk about will not be correlations. We're going to be talking about causal relationships. Okay. And then that should kind of do it for module 1. So this first quiz, just to kind of reiterate before I let you get out of here, I'll post it as soon as I'm done with my next class. So it should show up on Canvas around 12:30. Okay. It is due by the end of the day on Monday, next Monday. So you'll have 4 or 5, depending on how you count it, days to complete it. Once you start, 60 minutes to complete. That module 2 reading is also due by when? Monday at 11:50. All right, we had a little bit of buffer time there. So you'll see me start to put the files up. Also, when I'm doing this at the end of class, I know you're all in a hurry to get out of here, but if you start talking and I can barely hear myself, you then aren't going to get out of here as early because now I have to kill time to tell you to be a little bit quiet before I end class, okay? So those 2 assignments are due. You will also see me put up some of the files for the module 2 later today. So I always try to get out like the next week's slides, everything up there early. The only thing that you have to worry about in terms of assignments are that module 2 reading and that quiz that will pop up at around 12:30 today. Okay. So hopefully you had a good first week of class. I will see you guys on Tuesday.